So welcome everyone to Let's Talk Gillham Complete Streets Report. We are so glad to have you all here. There's been a lot of interest in this project. We've got a lot to cover today. You all offered excellent questions and observations when you registered. So besides our own material, we've also done our best to prepare for your questions and incorporated those into our presentation today. We are recording this session and we will post the video to our YouTube channel later on this week. For anyone who didn't get to attend the live meeting today, I've turned on Zoom's auto closed captions, so you should all be able to view those now on your end as well. Today, if you would, we have everyone, all the attendees muted for now, just because we do have so much to cover. We want to make sure we get through all of it. However, we also want to make sure that you have the opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. So please add those to the chat as you think of them. Just go ahead and do it in the moment. And then we'll try to get to as many of those as we can today. And anything that's left over, I'll make sure to add it to the follow-up email that'll come out later this week as well. We've only got an hour today, so we'll be respectful of everyone's time and make sure we get through that. Like I said, we'll have the recording and the follow-up questions. We'll address those in the follow-up email. So I would say we are about ready. We're going to buckle up and get ready for a really great discussion today and a really detailed email later on this week. So I would say, BikeWalk team, if you are ready, I'll introduce Eric Rogers, who is our executive director and co-founder, and also Teresa Carter, who is our director of community planning. These are going to be our hosts and our discussion leaders for today. Thanks for coming to Let's Talk Gillham Complete Streets Report. Take it away, folks.
Thanks, Liz. I'll give everybody a little bit of an overview of the project and why we got into this, and then turn it over to Teresa to go through all of the details that everybody's here to see. So on the next slide, Liz, just a quick overview of why and what we did. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of good data about people who walk and bike. So when we get the question, well, how many people use these bike lanes or how many people use these sidewalks? Unfortunately, there just isn't good data that's collected. There's a little bit of survey data from the census, but most municipalities, especially here in the Kansas City area, are not regularly counting people who walk and bike the way they count the volumes of cars on the streets. And so for us, this was part of our mission to try to fill a little bit of that gap. We wanted to understand how and why our constituents were using Gillham. We wanted to be able to provide data to inform future projects, especially that we could share with planners and engineers who are designing the bike lanes in the region, and just kind of fill in a gap that we saw existed and needed to be filled. And thankfully, we were able to get some funding from the Menorah Heritage Foundation that underwrote this project and gave us the ability to do this work. So we're really grateful that we have a funder like Menorah in town who's willing to invest in projects like this and make them happen. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background on the Gillham Road project. It came out of a planning exercise back in 2017, 2018. The neighborhoods along Gillham had identified a lot of concerns they had around safety. So things like speeding traffic, Gillham being a very big street to cross on foot if you were walking, and not a lot of places to cross. A lot of concerns about crashes. You know, there are 5 or 6 schools, especially elementary schools, in the neighborhoods around Gillham. And there's schools where we know a lot of kids are walking or biking to school. So there were a lot of safety concerns as well around kids getting to school. So this planning project happened around 2018. There was a steering committee of neighborhood residents, businesses, institutions along the corridor. BikeWalkKC was represented on the steering committee to bring the voice of people who walk and bike to the table. And ultimately, the solution that the community settled on to improve the safety on Gillham was a road diet, which meant reducing the number of lanes and creating this two-way cycle track for folks who were walking and biking and scooting and all those other modes, and to slow down traffic and decrease the distance that people had to cross on foot to get across the street. Construction started in 2020 and has been built in phases ever since then, to what we see now on Gillham today. Next slide, please. So just a few hot takes I'll share with you, and we'll cover these more in depth when we get into the data. But what we saw, this is the total count of people who were walking on biking on Gillham exceeded both local and national averages. So we saw huge uptake in folks walking and biking on the street. In the survey that we developed, people reported overwhelmingly feeling much safer when they were protected from cars. Most folks are going out of their way to use it, even if it makes their journey a little longer. They think it's worth it in order to have a safe, comfortable place to bike or to walk. Most folks said if the cycle track hadn't been there, they would have driven that trip that they were on when we surveyed them. So we're seeing a really high shift of folks from driving to other modes. And a lot of folks just weren't using it before because it wasn't a safe or comfortable place. And then finally, the big takeaway is that folks want to see a lot more of this in a lot more parts of town. They want to see it extended. They want more protected places to walk and bike elsewhere around the city. So those are just some of the quick things. And I'm going to turn it over to Teresa now to go through in detail how we did this project.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So before I dive into this too much, I do want to acknowledge all of the volunteers we had that gave their time to this project. We had almost 40 people that volunteered for the days that we were out and about in person doing the surveys and the observation. And I believe we have a handful of you on the call today. So if any of you that volunteered want to throw a little emoji up there and get some recognition, we're really thankful for you. And BikeWalkKC at large relies tremendously on our volunteer network. So we're very grateful to everyone. So thank you very, very much for everything that you did. So with that said, we will start kind of unpacking several of the things that Eric just shared. We used a lot of different methods to evaluate what's going on the Gillham cycle track. And we did that because if any of you are in the, data collection or observation space, you know that all the different methods have pros and cons. And we wanted to try and get as full of a picture as possible about what's happening on the cycle track and why. So we had a couple of main questions that we hoped to answer by the end of this, and that is how many people are using it, why are they using it, and has the protected infrastructure influenced their decision to use it? And go to the next slide, please, Liz. Okay, so the first data collection method to help us answer the first question of how many people are using the cycle track, we used myovision cameras for that. So some of you might be familiar with them. You may have seen them around town and not realized it, but they are recording devices that are widely used to capture traffic counts. And in our case, we decided to use them to count not only cars, trucks, and buses, which is what they're typically used for, but we're using them to count people on bikes and people using the cycle track. So this photo on the right side of the screen here gives a little demonstration of how the technology in the cameras does these automated counts of who is using the infrastructure. So In a perfect world, we would leave these cameras out 24 hours at a time at every single intersection that crosses the cycle track, so we could get as much information as possible. But the analysis of the data is pretty expensive. So for this effort, like Eric mentioned, we had funding from the Menorah Heritage Foundation. So we were able to put 4 cameras, or our 2 cameras out at 4 intersections for 14-hour periods on a weekday and on a weekend. And we work very hard to watch the weather, check if there's any big events happening in the city or construction, to make sure that we can put those cameras out on as typical of a day as possible, so that there isn't anything influencing usership strongly one way or the other. So we chose 4 intersections that were counted from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. on a Thursday in September, as well as on a Saturday in September. And since we only own 2 cameras, which we were able to purchase with another grant a few years ago, we spread those out across 4 intersections over a 2-week period. So most traffic counts are reported in 24-hour averages. Since we did ours for 14, we apply a factor to them so that we can get them to a 24-hour average. There isn't really a great national standard for bike ped counts, and so we used information and factors from the National Bike Ped Documentation Project. If you aren't familiar with that, I believe Liz just dropped a link in the chat, so you could explore that resource a little bit more. Next slide, please. Thanks, Liz. Okay, so these are the 4 intersections we chose, 27th to 39th Street. And we chose these intersections because the cycle track interacted with other bike ped infrastructure or bus stops. And we had also had some conversations with KCMO city staff while trying to select these, so that we could be supportive of their efforts on some of the cross streets that they were interested in getting data on. So here's the exciting stuff. So once we get all of the raw counts that come in, they come to us in the forms of these, big spreadsheets of numbers. And so we organize them into some easier to understand charts. So if you look at the chart on the left here, that is showing all of the people riding bikes who were in the Gillham cycle track across each of our 4 intersections. And then the chart on the right is showing every single other user that wasn't on a bike that was using or interacting with the Gillham cycle track. So that's people walking, people pushing strollers, scootering, jogging, any non-biking activity is captured by the pedestrian chart. The orange color is showing weekdays, and the teal is demonstrating the weekend counts. So looking at the chart on the left here, you can see that bike trips are higher on weekends across most intersections except 27th Street. One possible explanation, although it's kind of impossible to say, could be that more people bike for exercise or recreation on the weekends compared to weekdays, which is something that we heard in our survey responses, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But of the intersections analyzed, Armour had the highest ridership, particularly on the weekends, and then followed by 39th Street. So, and if you look at the chart on the right here, across all of the intersections that we looked at, more people are walking as compared to biking, both on the weekdays and on the weekends. And Armour has really high counts compared to the others. And an explanation for Armour being so high is that it has 2 really comfortable facilities that are interacting with one another, and there's also some frequent transit service. So, and I think I was at Armour doing observations one of the days, and it is just a really active multimodal intersection. So, one possible explanation. We also have these charts that are looking at bike ped mode share. And that means what portion of the overall traffic at each of these individual intersections is not driving a car or truck or taking the bus. So, if you do 100 minus any of these totals that you see here, driving a car is still the predominant form of transportation that people are using, but these mode share counts are actually really encouraging. So at the busiest intersection we saw, which is Armour, biking and walking counts combined represent almost 6%, 5.7 on the weekdays and 6.88 on weekends of the overall multure on Gillham Road, which exceeds that citywide biking and walking commute rate that Eric mentioned earlier, which is 1.8%. So it's, you know, these numbers might seem small, but it really is pretty tremendous that we're seeing something like this. And it's something that gets us really excited. So the next thing we did, so that MyoVision stuff was all of, you know, the quantitative, like it was helping us answer that question of how many people. But what the cameras can't tell us is why certain things are happening. It can't get to that. It can't help us answer questions about people's behavior, like why they're using it and whether or not the cycle track has influenced how they're making decisions about where they're going to get throughout their day. So that's what we turned to our amazing volunteers to help us do, which was twofold. They were doing observations, and then they were also conducting in-person surveys and helping people fill it out while they were using the cycle track to go about their business. So since volunteers provide their services for free, we were not constrained on how many intersections we could station them across. So we had 2 people per intersection, pretty much at every intersection of the cycle track from 19th Street all the way to the end at the southern end at Brush Creek Boulevard. Literally the couple weeks we were doing this project, the city just happened to be extending the cycle track north to Truman Road. So that's why we had people stopped at 19th at the northernmost boundary, because it hadn't quite been extended at that point. So we gave volunteers a template to help guide their observations and give us a little bit of an easier time on the back end trying to categorize everything. And then, like I said, volunteers were also helping us to administer surveys on the cycle track. So our prompts were designed to capture everything that the cameras couldn't. You know, were our vehicles speeding? You know, are they running red lights? Are there any near misses? How often are cars or trucks or delivery vehicles blocking access to the cycle track? Things like that, you know, and we couldn't think of everything. And so we really just told our volunteers, anything that happens that you think is of interest, please write it down. So this next slide here just shows an example of the observation matrix that we gave to all of our volunteers, and the categories at the top demonstrate the different areas that we had for people to be paying attention to. So on the next slide here, we have some of our observation takeaways, and I know all of this rings true for me or any of you that have used the cycle track before. I imagine this will feel, you know, I imagine you've had a similar experience, but the most frequently recorded observation overwhelmingly across all of the intersections was about poor driver behavior. And there were 4 primary behaviors that emerged. Drivers not yielding when cyclists had the right of way, taking illegal left turns, running red lights, and parking across the Gillham cycle track. So what we really heard from our observations is that there's a need for driver education about how to handle these different meeting points that we have across the cycle track. And maybe just a gentle reminder about how to observe traffic laws. So, okay, next slide here is getting into our survey. So we put together a really short and to the point survey, because sometimes we had, you know, 15 to 20 seconds to talk to people if we caught them at a red light, and, you know, we were just furiously helping them, you know, fill out their surveys. And amazingly, we heard from almost 350 people. We had our survey available online and in person, so we think that was a helpful way to get feedback. And so our survey was also trying to help us answer those behavior questions of how the infrastructure is influencing a person's decision to transport themselves if they had a choice. So we really just wanted to understand from people exactly why they were out there and how the cycle track was influencing them. Okay, so this next slide has some fun stats from the survey. So for those of you that were around before the cycle track was implemented, maybe you were part of some of the very brave people that actually rode on Gillham before the cycle track was there. We applaud your efforts, because the survey responses were really clear about a lot of things. But the one thing that really stood out to us is that it influences the presence of the cycle track influences people's decision making about how they're going to travel throughout their day. So of those people who are biking, 68% of people said that if they weren't biking, they would be driving the car. And when we asked people some open-ended questions about what else they wanted to see changed or improved, the most frequent responses we got were about better cycle track signage and infrastructure in general, like advanced signal warnings. So there'd be like bike ped priority signs, just higher visibility signage in general, both for people using the cycle track and for people driving cars. And also more notice for drivers just about how they're supposed to behave during an interaction. A lot of the bike ped infrastructure, to be fair to drivers, might still be kind of new to them, and it's not integrated into our driver's ed. And so there's kind of a shared responsibility here of making sure everybody knows how they're supposed to act on the cycle track. So people also said that they wanted to see the cycle track extended in all directions, which is very exciting, but that they really hoped it would be better maintained moving forward because debris and cleanup, especially after storms, was causing safety issues. Liz, will you go back one slide, please? Okay, so this one, where I think for a long time, maybe people have been like, oh, BikeWalkKC, they're just the bike people, they're making this stuff up. But we heard from a lot of people, and I promise we didn't pay all of them to vote this way. People are truly going out of their way to use the cycle track, and that is presumably because of this second stat here. It makes people feel safer, plain and simple. So we were really excited to get some concrete numbers on this, especially with the volume of people that responded to our survey. So we're excited to share that with you today. Eric is, yeah, we don't have the money to pay them. We would need a grant for that. Okay, Eric, do you want to jump back in and give some takeaways here?
Yeah, just on the next slide, just reiterating some of those stats, and the answer to the question is yes, people are using it and they want to see a lot more of it. I won't go through these all again, but just wanted to put those up there one last time so you could see them. On the next slide, there were some improvements that folks identified that they wanted to see. Teresa mentioned some of them, like driver behavior and wayfinding and signage. Some other things we heard is that people wanted even stronger physical separation between them and cars than what's there now. And there are examples from other cities that have even bigger barriers and different designs that we could look at in Kansas City. Some folks really also talked about raised crosswalks to really make it even safer for pedestrians to cross Gillham and for cars to slow down when people are trying to cross in a crosswalk. And then we heard a lot of people wanting to close those slip lanes. If you're familiar with those kind of little shortcuts a car can take to dart over to the right to make a right turn without stopping. We do know that those are inherently dangerous, and that we've heard of several incidents that have occurred with folks encountering drivers crossing their path in the slip lanes. So all of this, suggestions for improvement, we've packaged up and shared with the folks at City Hall so that hopefully we can start having conversations about how to take these forward and make some of these improvements and tweaks. And there's a lot of things we want to take forward from this. So on the next slide, I'll share a few things that are coming up, and we'll go into a little bit more detail. But really what we're learning from Gillham is causing us to, have this call to action of what can we do next and what's coming up. So the city has a 5-year plan for bikeways, and every year they put together a list of the projects for this year. So that project list for 2023 is in progress, and we need to get that moving forward. As we're starting to build out a network of trails and bike lanes and sidewalks all over the city, we're getting to the point where we've got a lot of little pieces here and there that are disconnected, that we really need to start closing those gaps and connecting the pieces so it forms a connected network. And there are some projects that can do that are up for federal funding. The Mid-America Regional Council has a carbon reduction grant program right now. There are several projects that are applying for federal funds, and between now and Friday, you still have a couple days to provide your comments and provide support for specific projects. They're all over the region, so you can look at the list and really see what's in your part of town and what you might want to support. So there are things like the Northeast KCK Heritage Trail, a cycle track on Burlington Road in North Kansas City, and a few others around town that you might be interested in. So please do take a look at that and take some time to put comments in. It's really helpful for those projects. On the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about what we know that the city is planning for future bike lane projects. And I'm going to focus here just on kind of the central part of the city, because that's where a lot of the on-street facilities would be built. If you looked at this map further north or further south, it would be much more trail-based. And not as much like Gillham, like what we're talking about here. So last November, the city had a public meeting where they put out their plans for this year. I think they may be refining this map a little bit, but this is the map as it was last November. The lines here in black show existing facilities, and that's both trails and bike lanes. The green routes are on the 5-year plan. We're in year 2 of the current 5-year plan. And then the blue lines represent the things that are currently planned for the near future in the 2nd year of this project. So it's things like 7th Street from the East Loop over into the historic Northeast, taking the Gillham Oak corridor further up Oak to 12th Street. Several different options for how to connect the Gillham cycle track with the Trolley Track Trail and the Brush Creek Trail. Meyer Boulevard would be another really big east-west connection from the Brookside area to Swope Park. And then a couple projects on Lexington and St. John Avenues in the historic Northeast as well. What we need from supporters of these projects and from you all here is to help us get this plan through the city council. This plan, once it's refined and staff has it ready to go, we still need the city council to vote to approve it. We're hoping that could happen in the next few weeks. So if you're not already on our advocacy mailing list, make sure to sign up or watch our social media, because we will need to rally folks at some point to come to City Hall and show up and support voting on this plan, and we'll keep you updated on that when we get closer to it. On the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about kind of the bigger initiative we're working on, we call Connect Our Trails. I mentioned we're building out these networks, but we still have a lot of really key gaps in them. So over on the left, if you look at some of the existing trail and bikeway projects kind of between downtown and South Kansas City, you can see we're getting close to a really good connected network that connects a lot of different destinations and neighborhoods. So downtown to Waldo and Marlboro, UMKC, Rockhurst, Swope Park, the VA, 18th and Vine. But over on the right, you'll see there are several big gaps in that network. This is the one between Gillham and Brush Creek and Trolley Track Trails that we've been doing a lot of work on. I know many of you have written letters to the mayor and city council members about these projects, and we thank you for that. We're really hopeful that this one in particular will get closed when we get that year 2 map approved through city council. So that the city can start construction on it. So we will keep you updated on those projects. And again, just wanted to mention, we're really focusing here on the central part of the city because that's where we need all of these really key on-street connections. If you're looking north-south or out in the suburbs, we have much more of a trail-based network that is also serving similar connections between different destinations. And so there's a lot of projects also, but way more than we can talk about today. So these are just a few we wanted to highlight. And with that, I think we're done with most of the presentation. We're going to cover a few questions that you all asked when you signed up for this event. And in the meantime, feel free to drop other questions in the chat and we'll get to as many of those as we can. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Liz, who's going to help us with the Q&A now.
Thanks, Rogers and Teresa. That was really excellent. That's a lot to unpack in just half an hour. So I really appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and encourage you once again, while I'm going to go ahead and dig through some of the questions that we got in our registration process for this event, to give all of you who are here in person today some time to think about the questions that this presentation prompted on your end. And you can go ahead and put those in the chat now while I talk to Teresa and Rogers about a couple of questions that we have right off the bat. So I want to ask if you have an idea. This is going to be a little bit about community engagement and about maybe how we like who rides bikes and that kind of thing, and who these bike lanes are for. We had several questions about this, so I want to make sure that we kind of cover the broad topic. Can you give us an idea about how community engagement, how we can reach as with this kind of thing, how we can reach the people who live in the neighborhood, the people who use the bike lanes, and who the bike lanes are for, I guess.
Sure. I would say at BikeWalkKC, our role is really to supplement the municipalities who are building these projects. So we don't build the bike lanes. You're not going to see me out there with a bucket of paint. But we try to work on the plans and policies that support those things happening. And so when a city in the region is planning a project, there's a lot of different requirements they go through with public engagement. So public meetings, flyers to residents, things like that. What we try to do is make sure as many people as possible know about those opportunities to get engaged. So a lot of our advocacy mailing list and our email newsletter are about sharing those opportunities when a project is in process, where there's an opportunity for you to go to a public meeting or provide your input on a project that might be on your street or in your neighborhood. We have a database of over 10,000 folks around the region who are interested in these issues. So we try to really get the word out as much as we can. And then we also try to encourage the cities in the region to do more, to go above and beyond kind of the bare minimum that often is the case. We try to connect folks at the local city halls with people that we know in the neighborhoods or using the bike lanes, and would be interested in sidewalks and trails and whatnot. So we try as much to make those connections between the community and the professionals that are doing this work.
I think you made a good point, and that kind of addresses another question that we have. You make a good point about not every bike, this kind of bike lane doesn't fit every community or every neighborhood. And can you talk a little bit more about how different safe streets or complete streets formats, am I saying that right? Different complete streets formations fit different neighborhoods, and how neighborhoods and planners can work together on that.
Yeah, the idea of complete streets is that it's a street that's usable by everybody, no matter whether you're driving, walking, in a wheelchair, biking. Also, it's a street that's usable for all ages and abilities, or, you know, everybody from age of 8 to 80, is how some folks talk about it. And we think that's really important, because if we're fortunate enough to live a long life, at some point, every one of us is going to experience a disability, whether temporary or permanent at some point in our life. So if you may be able-bodied today, but that may change over the course of your life. And so the idea is that the street is designed to work well for everybody, but that doesn't mean bike lanes everywhere. You look at the context of the street, you know, how wide it is, how busy, where is it in relation to other types of facilities. And so sometimes it's a bike lane, sometimes it's a protected bike lane, sometimes it's, you know, it's just a sidewalk and nothing else. It's really context sensitive. It's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, the other thing I'll add on to that is that there have been studies done that show that when we have protected infrastructure, safety and crashes are generally reduced across all modes. So a lot of times when we, you know, a lot of times some of the pushback about infrastructure for bikes and peds is that it's just for, you know, this tiny segment of the population. But when we are slowing down our streets, regardless of how we're doing it, it makes it a safer and more comfortable experience for everybody, including drivers, including people using the bus, everybody. It makes it a safer experience for everybody. So it's kind of another element of the complete streets model as well.
I definitely heard that when I was doing surveys at Gillham and Armour. I talked to a gentleman who lived in one of the apartment buildings nearby, and he said that before the bike lanes, and he doesn't ride a bike, he walks, he takes the bus, he gets a ride with friends, but he said before the bike lanes, there was a lot of speeding, and it felt much more dangerous to cross the street. And he's probably not going to ride a bike on the bike lanes, but just crossing Armour to get from his apartment to a friend's house, or his apartment to work, or his apartment to the bus stop. It was a shorter distance for him to cross, and it slowed down traffic in general to make things a little slower for him. So that's a good point. We have another question. Do you have thoughts about how, and this is more about kind of like the 5-year plan, the larger thing as a whole. Do you know if any of this would tie into the Green Loop or Greenway initiative that folks have been talking about in Kansas City? I've heard about this on and off.
Yeah, so it's called the Green Line, and it is basically a trail proposal that would circle kind of the greater downtown area. And it would use actually pieces of infrastructure that are either already there or are in plans. So, you know, corridors like West Penway, the Paseo, some of those things. And the idea is we're getting all these trails that come into downtown from different directions. So we've got Gillham and Oak coming in from the south. We've got Southwest Boulevard coming in. We've got the Riverfront Heritage Trail to the west. The Heart of America Bridge and others further north. And this would be a trail that would circle around and connect all of those as they come into the city. It's being developed by a private developer. It's not really a public project. I think it's kind of a mix though. So I don't know a lot of details about it. I know that they are doing a lot of the planning and design work now, but I don't have a lot of information about kind of timeline or next steps, but it absolutely would plug into all of these other projects and connect them, especially.
Okay. So it seems like there's a lot of this kind of project between, you just mentioned the Green Line, talking about the 5-year plan for KCMO, and you mentioned the larger like trails, more trails-based, off-street trails-based plans in the more suburban areas of our metro. Can you talk a bit more about how the Gillham Complete Streets Report, the work our volunteers did, the survey that everybody took, can you talk some more about how this could influence projects across the region? Or I guess maybe what we hope maybe other municipalities or other projects take away from this.
Yeah, I think there's a few things. We hope that this data-driven, evidence-based approach will help make the case for more of these facilities. A cycle track like on Gillham is a really good way to bring a facility into an area that's already built up. So if you go out to the edge of town and we're building a new 4-lane street, it's really easy to add a trail along the side and not have to do a lot of extra work. But in a place like Midtown where Gillham is, you can't widen the street. We're not going to tear down buildings to make room for bike lanes. Nothing like that's ever going to happen. And so it's about how do we repurpose the existing space that's already there between the curbs. And so this is a way to, in a sense, retrofit a street to add something that wasn't there in the original design. So we think this can be applicable in many parts of the region, not just in Midtown or downtown. There are lots of other places that are really only built up where this could happen. And so our hope is for advocates all around the region, this is kind of one more tool in the toolbox. If you're going to your city hall and asking for more protected and safe, comfortable places to walk and bike.
I think another thing too is that gets overlooked sometimes, and Eric mentioned it initially, but the PSP project that proposed this plan in the first place along Gillham was a road diet. And that's a word that brings up a lot of fear for people. We do live in a car dominant society. Kansas City is a driving city. And so this idea of taking away roadway capacity is really uncomfortable for a lot of people for very understandable reasons. And so I think another thing that this project is showing is that we haven't lost capacity on Gillham Road. It's still functioning exactly as it needs to, even though we've dedicated a little bit more space on the road for other users. And really what we're seeing is that mode shift, like thinking about those mode share graphics I shared, we don't have pre-data, unfortunately, other than knowing from our survey that a very small amount of people were probably using it for especially biking in the road before the cycle track was implemented. But we're seeing that once we gave a little bit more space to have the road be a little bit more equitable in terms of who all gets to use it, we're seeing behavior change away from cars and into other modes when people do have the choice for that. And behavior is the hardest thing to change. And so maybe this can serve as an example of good infrastructure is maybe one of the biggest tools in our toolbox to see the behavior change that we really want to in Kansas City and beyond.
I think you made a good point about people being able to see that these streets are for them. I know that since the Gillham cycle track went in, I have seen people just this week, actually, I have seen a person in a motorized wheelchair use it. I've seen people on scooters, people using skateboards. I've seen people who are dressed for all different kinds of jobs, riding their bikes on it, and generally not like professional, like bicycle racing jobs. Some of those too, which is awesome. But I see children and families, teenagers, you know, during like school commute hours. I've seen all different kinds of people riding on this bike lane, or using the bike lane, or jogging on the bike lane. And it feels like we can see each other and see a little bit of ourselves in each other who are getting to use the street now. Yeah, I feel like, I don't know, cutesy little inspiration on the bike lane.
There you go. It's also, it's a real thing that there's safety in numbers. So the more people we have that are out there using it, regardless of how they're choosing to use it, there's just, you know, more bodies in the space saying, hey, we're here, please give us the space that we deserve. Because for a really long time, we've given you a lot of the space. And I think other users in the Complete Streets model is just saying, hey, let's look at this and see how we can make it work a little bit better for everybody.
Liz, can I jump in with an evaluation question? There were some questions, and there was one question about, are there plans to do another similar survey soon? So I wanted Rogers to talk about that. We call him Rogers because we have too many Erics at BikeWalkKC. And also just the importance of evaluation and why we were the ones who came in and did this work, and just maybe step back a little bit from Gillham and just talk about evaluation of this type of infrastructure and why that's so important and why it's so hard.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I mentioned at the beginning that one of the reasons we did this is that cities don't typically do a lot of data collection and analysis, so they don't have a good idea of how many people are walking and biking and why they're walking and biking and where they're going to and from. And so for us as advocates for these things, we really needed the data and those tools in our toolbox to make the case when we go to City Hall and we lobby for funding for trails and bike lanes and sidewalks. We're much more effective when we have good data backing up our arguments. And, you know, I'll go back and say, I should have gone back earlier and say, what we see now on Gillham in a lot of ways is what's called a quick build. A quick build is a way for a city to build an infrastructure like a cycle track quickly and at low cost to see, you know, does it really work in this location? It allows them to then over time gradually invest more money in tweaking it and improving it. You may have noticed they've already flipped some of the turn lanes at a couple spots because car traffic was hitting pitch points with the changes. And so they've made some of those changes. You know, they've moved some of the barriers and bollards around to make things flow better. The Gillham planning study from back in 2018 had a range of kind of interim steps and then an ultimate design that is much more of like landscaped, greenery, paving, paver stones, like a much more elaborate and aesthetically pleasing design. And so this is a way to just prove, does this concept work? And now that it does, we can then start moving towards a more permanent design that addresses all of those things. And it's that evaluation piece after you make a change. How are you evaluating whether it was successful or not? And again, you know, a lot of cities in the region aren't doing that second step. They're not doing the pre and they're not doing the post as at least nearly as often as they need to be doing. And so this was a way for us to show that there is value in doing this. And here's a template that other you know, municipalities could take in themselves and do this type of work. We mentioned that we didn't have the before data on Gillham because we didn't have the resources at the time to do that. But thanks to another investment from the Menorah Foundation, we are planning to do both pre and post data collection with another bike lane project that's hopefully coming in the near future. And so then we think we'll have kind of the full example of the best practice of collecting data beforehand, making a change, and then evaluating how that change went.
And I'm just going to put my fundraiser hat on for a second. We were fortunate to have the grants from Menorah, but we can't count on those. So I'm going to throw out there that if you want to see more of this, one, advocate to your city council to please budget for evaluation so that that's there as a line item, but also support us, because we're doing this between kind of putting together bubble gum and tape together grant funding and personal donations and becoming a member. So if this is important to you, and if this is something that you want to see more of, we really need you to be part of the work.
Okay, thank you, all of you. We have just a few minutes left on the schedule. So I'm going to talk for just a few seconds and let folks get their last questions in the meantime. We're not going to keep you any longer than necessary, but we do want to make sure we get that we respond to everybody that we can. Thank you so much for coming out today. We really appreciate you spending your lunch hour or a little after your lunch hour with us. We really appreciate every single person who volunteered, who told their neighbors about it, who took the survey in person or online, who shared the links, who, scooted or biked or rolled or however you use the bike lane networks in the Kansas City region. Thank you so much. And as Amy said, a special thank you to our partners and our BikeWalkKC members, folks who have given as little as $1. Any amount counts, makes you a BikeWalkKC member for a whole year. Thank you so much for joining us today. We had a question, and I think Teresa answered it. Yes, how do you get on the mailing list? We've got the link in the chat. Thank you all so much for coming out. I'll get that follow-up email to you later this week with the recording, and have a good afternoon.